is the fundamental system of distinctions and assumptions upon which one bases and generates all other knowledge, as Gregory Bateson defined it. Epistemology is the history of the origins of knowledge, in other words, how you know what you know. The epistemology of NLP begins with the presupposition that map is not the territory. Each of us actualizes possibilities in the world through the models or maps we create in our minds. NLP teaches that no one map is any more true or real than any other, but that your ability to be effective and evolve beyond where you are now is a function of having a map which permits the greatest possible range of choices. In NLP terms, then, a master is not someone who already knows the answers and has the solutions, but someone who is able to ask worthwhile questions and direct the process of learning, problem-solving, and creativity to form new maps of the world that lead to useful new answers and possibilities. The goal of mastering NLP is to learn how to model and apply the tools and principles of modeling to develop flexibility at the deepest levels of ourselves. Epistemology involves exploring the hidden presuppositions, so assumptions, underlying different models of personal organization, the ones we share as well as the ones which make us unique. Switch to cowboy. The application of epistemology has to do with the system of distinctions and skills an individual or organization applies to meet espoused values and achieve goals. And applied epistemology must answer such questions such as, how do we know that we know something, or we have operational competence? How do we know that others know something or have operational competence? And through what means do we develop knowledge and operational competence? Applied epistemology also has to do with a system of values and goals promoted by a particular approach. For instance, the philosophy of NLP is that effective learning. I'm finding it so difficult to read this book in this power pose. So, change again. Applied epistemology. This one is the already one state. Applied epistemology also has to do with the system of values and goals promoted by a particular approach. For instance, the philosophy of NLP is that effective learning and change involves initially setting goals, evidence procedures to reach a particular desired state. A wide coverage of strategies and activities are then provided in order to be able to vary the operations applied to reach goals. Another important question for applied epistemology is, how does what you know, have learned, or discovered fit with what is already known? Until a new idea is harmonized with what is already known, it will not be put into practice, regardless of how brilliant it is. One of the most important tasks of applied epistemology and modeling is to make it possible for people to understand ideas which challenge and transform old ways of thinking. This is especially challenging when those people are still thinking in the old way. According to the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, all great new ideas go through 3 stages. The first is ridicule, the second is violent opposition, then finally they are accepted as having always been self-evident. Molecular geneticist Gunther Stent, 1987, maintains that much of the struggle related to the acceptance of new ideas and paradigms stems from a contradictory epistemological attitude towards events in the outer and the inner world. Stent identifies these conflicting philosophies as materialism versus idealism or constructivism. The materialist point of view essentially maintains that there is a real external world that exists independently of the mind. The mind is a reflection of that reality and creates an imperfect representation of that real world. From the idealist or constructivist perspective, reality is constructed by the mind. Perceived events and relations have no reality other than their existence in human thought. From this point of view, reality is a reflection of the mind. The external world is an imperfect representation or projection of pure forms of thought. Quote, pure. Stent points out that in recent years a third alternative has been emerging, spurred by Chomsky's theory of transformational grammar and the notion of surface structure and deep structure. He calls this new epistemology structuralism, and Stent explains, both materialism and idealism take it for granted that all the information gathered by our senses actually reaches our mind. Materialism envisions that thanks to this information, reality is mirrored in the mind, whereas idealism envisions that thanks to this information, reality is constructed by the mind. Structuralism, on the other hand, has provided the insight that knowledge about the world enters the mind not as raw data, but in a highly abstracted form, namely as structures. In the pre-conscious process of converting the primary data of our experience step by step into structures, information is necessarily lost, because the creation of structures, or the recognition of patterns, is nothing else than the selective destruction of information. Thus, since the mind does not gain access to the full set of data about the world, it can neither mirror nor construct reality. Instead, for the mind, reality is a set of structural transforms of primary data taken from the world. This transformation process is hierarchical in that stronger structures are formed from weaker structures through selective destruction of information. Any set of primary data becomes meaningful only after a series of such operations has so transformed. It is that it has become congruent with a stronger structure pre-existing in the mind. Canonical knowledge is simply the set of pre-existing strong structures with which primary scientific data are made congruent in the mental abstraction process. Hence, data that cannot be transformed into a structure congruent with canonical knowledge are a dead end. These fundamental epistemological distinctions can be characterized as materialism. There is a real external world that exists independently of the mind. The mind is a reflection of that reality and creates an imperfect representation of that real world. In materialism, the mind is like a camera that takes pictures of reality. Idealism. Perceived events and relations have no reality other than their existence in human thought. Reality is a reflection of the mind. The external world is an imperfect representation or projection of pure forms of thought. In idealism, the mind is like a projector that creates reality. Structuralism. Reality is a set of structural transforms of primary data taken from the world. The conversion of primary data into structures involves the selective deletion, distortion, or generalization of primary data. The mind can neither mirror nor construct reality. Stronger structures are formed from weaker structures through the selective destruction of information. Primary data becomes meaningful only after a series of such operations has transformed it to be congruent with a pre-existing structure. In structuralism, the mind is like an editor that interacts with and selects primary data. From the perspective of structuralism, many ideas are premature. If there is no bridge to existing canonical knowledge, thus, for a new idea to become reality, it must first pace, and then lead the pre-existing models of reality. Einstein's theory of relativity, for instance, encompassed and acknowledged all of Newton's laws, adding new formulations that have opened the door to new realities, such as atomic energy. Ideas that are too far ahead of their time must wait to become manifest. In order for Leonardo's flying machines or Tesla's robots to be brought into reality, they have to wait for the rest of the necessary knowledge to come into existence. Stent points out that Gregor Mendel's studies of the inherited traits in sweet peas existed for 35 years before it was rediscovered by biologists at the end of the 19th century, becoming the cornerstone of modern genetics. Stent explains, Mendel's discovery made no immediate impact. It can be argued because the concept of discrete hereditary units could not be connected